Daydreaming about dragons. We are back. I want to talk about I don't want to call anyone out, but it's a pernicious, I don't know, conventional wisdom maybe, or thing about running games, DMing games, in games where there is a DM role, and that is not DM-ful, so it's not distributed all over the table, but there's one person who is the DM, GM, storyteller, hollycock, god, whatever it is called, the person who is facilitating the game in a larger sense and running the world and the consequences. And there is this thing, it's like a meme, I guess, in which the GM is surprised by the players. And the players are like, oh, aren't you surprised? And the GM says something like, no, I had this planned all along. And I want to shoot an arrow in this idea in hopes that this idea perishes. And I don't want to insult anyone who created it or who does it, but here's why. I want us as gamers to be more transparent about this process. As a GM, you don't need to have mystique by shadowing up how you do what you do. You should have transparency so that your friends are like, wow, that's really cool how you did that. I think I can do that someday. You want to encourage your friends to take up that role because it's just a role. And then you get to play. And then you have more GMs in the group and more GMs in the world, more people who can go out and be ambassadors for this bizarre elf game hobby and get more people playing. And that's what I want. So that is why I don't like this thing that I've seen I see it on Twitter, I've seen it around. It vexes me where people feel like the GM has to be this Machiavellian mastermind whose techniques are entirely opaque, and the players are like, oh, I could never understand how you do it. It's just genius. Oh my goodness. And you just, when that happens, you just kind of twirl your mustache behind the screen and say, oh yes, I knew this was all going to happen all along. No. I reject this idea. I reject it wholeheartedly. I reject it entirely. And the reason why I reject it is because I believe that this hobby is a healthier place without it. This hobby is a healthier place when I'm not saying you have to be, you have to keep no secrets, right? So right now, here's an example. I'm running a Blades in the Dark game with Strash and Lauren, and you can look at that in the show notes. I'll have a link to the YouTube playlist. You can take a look at it. And in that game, I'm running a kind of a mystery with the Blades in the Dark system, and they are running investigators looking into this mystery, doing a long and involved drug case that's sprawling all over the setting, and it's awesome. And there are parts of it that I really want to talk about, but I can't quite yet because I don't want to ruin the game for them. But I will. Once we're done and we can move on to another case, I'm going to say, hey, listen, this is how I prepped for it. This is what I did. And if I could go back, this is what I would have changed. And I was so excited when you folks did this. I want my techniques to be transparent so that when Lauren and Strash do their thing, they can use those techniques, And maybe we can even round robin the GM a little bit, and I can play an investigator or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be for a round robin game. It's just because I want more GMs out there in the world. I want that conversation to be open and honest without having to create this false mystique. Believe me, when you're a badass GM and you run fun games, you're going to have a mystique anyway. I promise you. When you run a fun game and someone goes home from your game and tweets about it or talks to their other friends about it, you will garner a mystique. It's cool. And you don't need to be closed about it. You can be totally open. That's the cool mystique. That's the kind of person I want to be. The other thing I don't like about this pernicious meme is that it makes it so that the GM isn't supposed to be surprised by their players? What? Who? What? What? Man, I love it when I'm surprised by my players. When you're surprised by your players, don't act like you're not surprised. You should be high-fiving people. I show my shock. I'm like, oh my goodness. Let's play the consequences of that amazing nonsense you just did. That's great. And I mean amazing nonsense in the most celebratory way. So I don't want to not be surprised. I always want to be surprised. I love it when my friends surprise me in delicious, amazing, beautiful, strange, bizarre ways. That's the best. Why wouldn't you want that? Why wouldn't you be pushing for that? You know, I like to keep my adventures dirt simple and have the players will surprise me and make it complicated. And if you're starting to GM and you're like, I don't know if I can create all this stuff, believe me, start simple. The players will make it complicated. And if the game is good, the game will help. And that, my friends, is what's on my mind today. That's what's going on. That's what's rattling around. Because I don't want this idea that the GM has to be this god. Literally, right? You kind of have a god's eye view of things. But that doesn't mean you have to act godlike in front of your friends. Goodness gracious, how exhausting is that? It's ridiculous. It's not the kind of artist you want to be. It just isn't. It just isn't. Right? Gaming artists should be like a friendly neighborhood punk band. I'm going to use that metaphor till the wheels come off. Strumming your guitar as hard as you can, as loud as you can, in the garage, for the glory of your friends who are strumming along with you, beating their drums, screaming their lyrics. And when someone comes along and is like, hey, I'd love to pick up that bass guitar, you don't like hide your frets. I don't know anything about guitars, so forgive me. If my guitar metaphor breaks down, I'm sorry, I have no musical experience whatsoever. But when someone comes by and says, hey, I'd like to play bass guitar, you don't hide your finger mojo. You say, this is how you lay down, this is how I laid down my first bass line. Maybe it'll help you. That's the kind of artists we want to be. That's how we want to rock. Loud, transparent, with our friends. You know what I mean? That's what I mean. Cool. Thank you for listening to that friendly rant. I hope it finds you well. On to Inspiration Goat. Wait a minute, Inspiration Goat. I'm not even done with this book. I haven't even finished it. What are you talking about? Okay, we'll talk about it. I am about 3/4 of the way done with the first book, The Shadow of the Torturer, in the Book of the New Sun series by Wolfe. And I've stopped reading it. I'm taking a break. And I'm reading a more modern fantasy novel that I'll talk about another time. But what I'm noticing, going from one to the other, because the other book, the new book I'm reading is kind of a hot new fantasy novel, is that the pacing and what is in a chapter is very different. In modern fantasy books, and I love modern fantasy novels, but in modern fantasy novels, generally, I'm generalizing here, very often there is an interesting character choice per chapter, right? Some thing happens. If it was a role-playing game, it would be the thing that inspires the die roll, right? But in Book of the New Sun, the pacing is very different. Every chapter isn't so much a choice as a world. And it almost feels like every chapter is a full meal rather than an hors d'oeuvre. And I'm not putting down modern fantasy novels. I love modern fantasy novels. It's just very different. And it's reminding me and making me think about what we put in our gaming as pacing and how we pace them. And what we're bringing to the table without even realizing it because of the media we digest. And Book of the New Sun definitely has me thinking about downshifting and slowing it down sometimes. And I don't want to slow it down too much, right? I love the pace of the games that I play. But sometimes you just kind of want to take a break and savor it a little bit. Enjoy the world. Be there in a moment. You know? That's, every piece of media I digest, I try to think about how is this affecting my gaming? That is how it's affecting my gaming. Book of the New Sun definitely has me thinking about language. If I'm going to come back and talk about this thematically later, after I've read more of it and completed it, I'll definitely have to talk about the language in it because it's really, really interesting. Sometimes the words are just so obscure that I have to look them up. And then other times I find that they're totally made up words. It's really beautiful the way it uses language. But today, pacing. And what is it about our media that is inspiring pacing? Because I really think about HBO TV shows and modern fantasy novels. I feel like those are the two things that really affect my pacing. And they're pieces of media that I'm really thinking about as I'm running games. The Wire and Deadwood, and maybe even The Sopranos a little bit. Maybe a little bit of Game of Thrones. And how does that affect what is in, where I start a scene as a GM, or what I try to do as a player? I just think it's interesting as heck, and that's what I'm thinking about, and I'm not even done with it yet, and I'm setting it aside because I'm frustrated. I like to finish a book in a month. I've been reading this thing for 2 months, and I am, a couple hundred pages into it, but I feel like I need to chew through something a little faster. So, pacing. What do you get done in a scene? What do you get done when you're describing something to a player? What do you get done in an hour of game time? So that's something that players, when they've come to my table from other places, have said to me. Have said, "Wow, I can't believe how much we got done this game. That was ridiculous." And I've always taken that as a compliment, and I still take it as a compliment. But I'm also wondering if there are times when we need to just be. Let's just have a chat. Let's chill. I don't know. I'm going to be thinking about that. I'm going to be watching in my games and seeing when I want to pump the brakes and when I want to downshift. I'd love to hear what you think about it. How's the pacing in your games? How much do you get done in a session? How much do you get done in an hour? How much do you get done in 15 minutes? And if you don't want to think about it that way, how much do you get done in a scene? What is it that makes you say, okay, we can cut to someone else? Are you giving someone time to think? Is it that you've gotten to a point of an interesting die roll? I don't know. It's good stuff. It's interesting stuff. Those are important techniques for a GM, especially when the players are all over the place. Last night I had a game where we had a big battle in Stars Without Number, and the characters were almost never in the same place. Ever. In the whole battle. They were all in separate places, and we just had to like get through a little bit of combat and then get to the next person. And I'm just thinking about that pacing. Combat pacing is a whole other issue, I think. But when it's not combat, when you don't have those forced rounds of how much you can get done, it becomes much more of a GM technique issue. And what then? Are you Book of the New Sun, or are you Game of Thrones? Because I feel like Game of Thrones is very... I can feel it. When Game of Thrones is working, the character has a really interesting decision to make every chapter. And very often, because it's point of view chapters, you'll see the character make in the beginning of the chapter, you'll see the fallout from the previous decision, and then at the end of the chapter, a new decision will come up. And that's kind of how he keeps you reading those books. And it's not a terrible thing to think about and internalize as a GM. But anyway, I'm taking us to Game of Thrones. I just wanted something to compare Book of the New Sun to. Because in Book of the New Sun, it's less about decisions and more about this alien, amazing world that the character is in. And within that world, there are worlds. It almost feels like a Canterbury Tale in some ways. Cool. Pacing in your games. Hit me up. Let me know what's going on. I'll have info in the outro on how to contact me. If you would like to support the show, you can hit the support the show button, and that's one way to do it. You can purchase the Dictionary of Moo, which is my setting book for the Sorcerer RPG by Adept Press by Ron Edwards. It is a fantasy swords and sorcery reskinning of Mars, maybe somewhat Call the Conqueror and the Bible is in there too. Check it out. Let me know what you think. And I would love to hear your thoughts and what you've added to the dictionary as you've played. If neither of those things work for you, you can always email me or hit me up on the Anchor app. You can send me an MP3. My email is judd.karlman@gmail.com. And my Twitter will also be in the show notes, which is JUDD_OF_KRYOS. So either way, any way you want to contact me, hit me up. I'd love to hear from you, and I will talk to you soon.